Welcome to today's episode where we discuss the most recent installments of a different series every show. Today we're reviewing the final season of Endeavour, the British detective drama created by Russell Lewis as a prequel to the Inspector Morse series. Endeavour first aired in 2012 and followed the early career of the eponymous detective in the 1960s, solving fictional crimes around Oxford University. The series has been widely acclaimed for its gripping storyline, strong performances, and attention to period detail. After 8 seasons, Endeavour has come to a close with its 9th and final season, which consists of 3 episodes, the last of which is fittingly titled Exeunt. It's Friday, March 17th. Let's begin. So in 2012, there were a lot of new pilots that came out, just like every year, but I was wondering, since you're such a movie or TV buff, whether or not you could tell me which of these hadn't come out. All right, so Endeavour, obviously.
Right.
Okay, House of Cards on Netflix, The Newsroom, HBO, Bates Motel, A&E, Arrow on the CW, Vikings, the History Channel, Schitt's Creek, CBC, which is a Canadian network, Elementary, CBS, Girls, HBO, or Line of Duty, BBC.
I'm going to have to go with House of Cards. Yeah.
No, House of Cards was definitely 2012. It was Schitt's Creek. I think that came out a few years later, in like 2015. But when I think of Endeavour, I really don't match it up with those other shows, probably because I didn't hear of it back then. Like, I was only introduced to Endeavour a couple years ago, but it was big from the start in the UK.
I always saw the poster for it on a streaming service. In fact, I even remember I watched the first season to it, I think like a couple years ago, maybe 4 or 5 years ago.
Did that help when you jumped into this season?
Actually, no. What was funny was that I was thinking, even while watching this, and just plans never came to be, I was like, maybe I should also just watch the second season just to make sure. And had I done that, that actually would have helped a lot with this season, because this season focuses with a storyline that was actually introduced, and I did have to do some research because they continually were talking about it this season, with a storyline that was introduced in the second season called the Blenheim Veil. That was apparently a case.
Okay.
That was like pretty huge.
So you went like hardcore in on the cases that he solved every single episode. Before we get into that, I do want to talk about the origins of Endeavour Morse, the character. And to do that, we have to turn to the crime writer who made it, Colin Dexter, who wrote the 13 Morse novels between 1975 and 1999.
Right, because Endeavour is supposed to be a prequel series to a different show, right?
Obviously, Inspector Morse, yeah. So once that became a big hit, his books, it was adapted to the ITV television series that most people who enjoy Endeavour are familiar with, called Inspector Morse, ran from 1987 to 2000, averaged 15 million viewers an episode, which I know back then, like X-Files was close to 20 million, but that's still a lot.
Yeah.
And then it also got spun off into the Lewis series, which ran from 2006 to 2015 into the Endeavour series, and then Endeavour from 2012 to 2023. And about Colin Dexter, I have a little 3 truth, 1 lie game, and I want to see if you can spot the lie. Ready? Although Dexter's military service was a Morse code operator, the character was named after his friend Sir Jeremy Morse, a crossword devotee like Dexter. B. Dexter was in his mid-30s and a senior classics instructor when gradually he became aware that his students in his class were playing popular music at an ever-increasing volume. He was becoming deaf and had been unaware of it the whole time. He made appearances in all 3 of the shows before passing away in 2017, and then Dexter was known as for his chain-smoking habit, which often left ash marks on the pages of his manuscripts. As a result, his editor had to work extra hard to decipher the text and fill in missing words.
I feel like it's either the second or third one. I'm going to go with
either that he's deaf or that he made all appearances.
I'm going to go with that he made all appearances.
Nope, that's absolutely true. In fact, they even had him make an appearance in the episode, in the finale. He was in a picture, in a photograph.
Oh, okay.
But like he actually was in episodes earlier in the series before he passed away.
Okay, so then I'll just go with the college professor one.
Nope, he was deaf, but Dexter was not known for a chain smoking habit. So D was the wrong answer, or the right answer. And so Colin Dexter, the inventor of the character. However, Endeavour there was no source material to base it off. They had big shoes to fill going in, but Russell Lewis, the creator of the show, had to actually write all 36 episodes, all 36 90-minute episodes And none of them ended up with a lower than 7.6 rating on IMDb.
Wow, that is an accomplishment.
That is something to take on. However, he only had to write between 3 to 5 episodes per year. So I guess that's a little different. But Endeavour still had big shoes to fill because it had to match up with its successor series, which, like Better Call Saul with Breaking Bad, you didn't know what you were going to get at first. And to do that, you'd have to be a really big fan in order to make sure you didn't miss any details. Also, Sean Evans, the guy who plays Endeavour, his casting was met with skepticism originally.
Yeah,
I guess why.
Okay,
you know why.
I don't know why. I was just about to talk about him, but I would just guess people didn't feel like maybe the description of the character matched up with him.
Because Inspector Morse was like this grumpy sleuth who was like good at his job, but like did not meet how they described him as perky.
If I had to describe someone like that for this show, I would say it's Thursday, more like his partner.
Yeah. That relationship was supposed to be symbiotic with the Lewis character later on in the series. Thursday never appeared, obviously, in Inspector Morse. That's why they had to sort of get rid of him by the end, and a lot of people were expecting him to die, but I hear that did not happen. The other thing I just wanted to point out is obviously the show is based in Oxford, England. This season was 1972, so they've worked their way through the 60s, kind of like Mad Men. This Constable Endeavour Morse is solving different types of crimes. They're not always murders, are they?
At least for this season it is.
And then usually they also delve into a little bit of the social and political landscape that's going on at the same time. The legacy of the show, because it came out in 2012, is that like there have been so many British crime dramas that have come out, detective shows specifically: Broadchurch, Grantchester, The Missing, Happy Valley, Marcella, Collateral, Bodyguard, Killing Eve, The Bay, Dublin Murders, Strike. Like, we've done a few of those shows, and they're all pretty well liked. All those, a lot of them are still continuing. But yeah, let's go ahead and jump into these first three, or the final 3 episodes.
Well, before we do that, I do want to just give away kind of my first pro, which is the fact that Sean Evans, I think he did like a great job this season as Morse in season 9. Like, I mean, I've only known him really from season 1, and I thought that he was able to kind of get the job done, and was fine. But like in season 9, he really did prove me wrong. He was like my favorite character to watch, and also I just
so he's grown as a character.
Job. Yeah, so
he's
like,
also more tortured from what I've heard.
Yeah, you get like a lot of that this season. But starting off was actually the first episode. It deals with a violinist. Her name is Christina Poole, and she is harassed by an unknown source. And then there's also some murders that happen, like Edward Thomas. He was a victim. They think it's because of heroin at the beginning of the episode. Also, at the beginning of the episode, we see not the murder itself happen, but the torture beforehand by someone named Mickey Flood, who is a police informant. And then a main violinist, like 30 minutes into the episode, Margot, is investigated by Morse and Thursday. And then we even get like kind of a flashback storyline. I'm not sure exactly when it's supposed to be, but like decades earlier, with this person named Rose Garland, because apparently a lot of people who were part of this orchestra kind of grew up together in like an all-girls Catholic school, and different things like that. The first episode itself, I actually was a little bit worried about, because something about the first season of Endeavour was I actually wasn't a huge fan of it itself. I think that, like, you know, when it comes to the pacing, also the hour and 30 minutes, and the continually, like, having to pay attention to every scene, you're going to miss something, gets pretty daunting and melancholy after a while. But overall, I had that same type of feeling with episode 1.
Yeah, it has the lowest rating. Prelude, it has an 8.1 on IMDb. The only real fact I got about it was that, again, he was facing alcoholism, and he said straight out, "I'm cured, all right," which was supposed to be some sort of reference to Kubrick's Clockwork Orange, because the line there was like, "I was cured, all right," and when the brainwashed Alex is starting to have violent or depraved tendencies again.
The Clockwork Orange comparison is definitely
that comes along later on.
Yeah, way later.
But yeah, you're saying that this violinist dies, and you mentioned an orchestra. I find that funny because they've had the same orchestra play the theme and the music for all of the entire Endeavour Morse series, like all 100 episodes. If you combine all of them together, they've had their own independent orchestra at Oxford that like played them all, which is crazy. It's daunting, but they like even had the cast come in for the last episode and listen to them play the opening, because sometimes like the opening even has like Morse code in it, because they're like
That-
really
yeah.
into the detective stuff.
That makes
Anyways,
sense.
so like, yeah, how do they solve the crime? Is everything good by the end?
I mean, for the most part. So it turns out that Margot was the lead violinist, and someone decided to poison her rosin, which I think is what they clean. Her rosin, yeah. What they clean the string for the violin with. I think she was like allergic to either nuts or strawberries, and she ends up dying because of that. And we learned that this was a pretty standard detective episode because it was just one of those ones where they go around to everybody and they interview them and they learn new cases about everybody. And it turns out that it was Mabs, just the second violinist, who was always annoyed of being second fiddle to Margot, even though she was friends with them. And also Margot was the one that was harassing Christina Poole because like Christina would go into her room to kind of practice violin and always see on her mirror like the words "bitch" or something like that. Kind of.
These characters don't come back into play in the next 2 episodes, so they're like one-offs.
Well, that's the strange thing about this show. If this was an American show, even a case-by-week show, I feel like whenever you get to really towards the end of the series, they do kind of try and have a story arc, and even though there is somewhat of a story arc throughout the season, this show
you mean that the story arc involves everyone, as opposed to just kind of dismissing people and then never seeing them
like
again.
For example, in episode 3 it still does a case by week storyline, even though that's the finale, and they spend a good chunk on it on that one as well, which is just something I don't feel like you would see in an American TV show.
There's a couple other references, like for instance the love interest. I feel like they would have handled that, but we'll touch upon that in a minute. Get into episode 2. That's called Uniform, and it also reminded me of the Sherlock episode where the guy was murdered because of his uniform. Do you remember what
you're talking about season 3,
where he gets like
episode
stabbed
2.
in the belt?
So episode 2 was actually the best episode I had seen of Endeavour up until that point, because it was really funny. And what I mean by that is that the main storyline is about, and they even started off with an ad for this TV show that Thursday is watching with his wife. Apparently it deals with it's like a case by week show, but like again, takes place in the 70s. It's a murder mystery show, and it's in its final season, obviously being pretty meta to Endeavour itself. But also it deals with the Clockwork Orange, literally the group, the Clockwork Orange, so much so that they wear masks, they recreate shots from the movie itself at the very beginning where they're all walking in slow-mo, and they even beat a homeless man up with canes, and that's exactly what happens in Clockwork Orange, the beginning scene.
I mean, the show is no stranger to references, allusions, connections. It always connects with itself, but Charles Dickens, Sherlock, Shakespeare, Seven, and in this case Stanley Kubrick. But besides Clockwork Orange, what happens in the case to these students who are being accused of murder, right?
Well, murder. They see that there was the homeless man that they beat up nearly to death. When Morse and Thursday investigated, they see that there's a bottle in his neck, like a broken bottle in his neck, and then there's also
the pathologist realizes that, right? That's Max DeBrin. He's actually a character in the later Morse series, like one of the few that actually transcends into the next series.
So I don't know if this is the case or not, but DeBrin feels like one of those characters in the show that has like a huge fan base, at least with him, because he does feel like, I guess if any character is the comic relief of this show, probably that one.
Okay, so him, Endeavour, and also Jim Strange are the 3 that are characters in the Inspector Morse series.
So Reginald Bright, who also is a character in this show, he's not in the
I don't believe
series.
so.
Yeah, because one thing I didn't mention in the first episode is that Reginald Bright, who I think has been in the show, or a character in the show since the first season, because I think I remember seeing him there, he's talking about how he's going to retire, and also talks to Thursday about how Thursday should think about retiring as well. But actually, there's another body that shows up like 20 minutes into the show of a cop named Swan, and so they're basically trying to figure out what's happening. What I thought was smart about the second episode is that this group is just, like I said, it's literally the Clockwork Orange, and one thing I don't really like about Case by Week shows is that they always try to give you backstory on a ton of the victims or the murderers or whatever, but since the Clockwork Orange is already such a known film and the characters themselves are already so identifiable, like the show was like, you know what, you already know these characters, we're not going to focus too much on them, and they weren't like overutilized or anything, and therefore I thought that since the villains were good that week or in this episode, I thought the episode itself was pretty good as well.
But what ends up happening to them?
So there is one member of the Clockwork Orange. He has a stutter who has somewhat of a moralistic code. It turns out that the people that or the homeless person that they beat up at the beginning of the episode, they didn't end up killing. The person who ended up killing them him was the main actor of the television show that you see, which I found funny, and I thought gave a good sense of foreshadowing, because the episode starts off with like a 70s camera, and it shows a dead body, and then it shows the main character of the show stepping out of a car and being a detective and talking straight to the camera.
So why did the actor kill him, though?
So the homeless person was actually his brother.
Oh.
And he thought that, if the press came out that this show was ending, and apparently the brother and, like, his homeless crew would go to sets and, like, stuff their pants with a lot of the food and always just kind of wreak havoc and everything.
Okay.
He just thought to himself, because he ended up going to where his brother lived, or where his brother was staying at, saw that his brother was kind of almost beaten nearly to death, and was just like, you know what, I'm just going to finish the job because I'm tired of this. So
what would you rate this episode?
I would give it an 8 out of 10. Another thing that he ended up doing, though, was that Swan, who was a police detective, saw him show up to the investigation, so he threw him off a roof, made it look like a suicide.
Wow, this guy wasn't afraid to, like, cover his tracks.
Yeah, the Clockwork Orange gang they did end up killing someone as well. They ran into a motorcyclist. The motorcyclist didn't have his lights on, so they dumped the car, and yeah, they ended up being arrested. That was the end of the second episode, at least.
Well, it's supposed to have also been a reference to the Leopold and Loeb trial that happened in, like, the 1920s about these kids at the University of Chicago who plotted and kidnapped and killed this kid. And both ended up in prison. One of them died early, and then one of them died later on. But that one's, like, a really famous trial in history.
Well, I know that 2 of the Clockwork Orange members, like, were just kind of very tight-lipped about it, but it was really the person who had a stutter and one of the other group members who kind of sold out the whole group as to what happened. And also, in the second episode, that's when we get our first sense of the real danger that the Blenheim Vale case kind of holds, because, like I said, the Blenheim Vale case showed up in season 2. From what I could gauge, it was a historic child abuse scandal.
You're talking about the Blenheim, right? Blenheim, that's how you pronounce it, I think.
Okay, yeah, Blenheim Vale, where it was like a child abuse scandal where, like, 6, I think, boys at, like, this orphanage or abandoned orphanage as of now were sexually and physically abused. And then there was also someone who named Andrew Lewis, who was, like, looking for his mom and ended up dying, and then the mom ended up being dead as well. And as Thursday and Morse are really looking into this case more and more, bad things are happening to them. For example, Morse was pulled over by 2 fake cops who you're not supposed to know are fake at the beginning of the scene, but later on they start beating him up and just, like, breaking his, like, taillight on his car. You're also getting
intimidating him.
Yeah, you also get Thursday getting phone calls from people we've seen throughout the season being like, stay out of this case, like, it's not going to end up well for you. So that was kind of also some foreshadowing happening in the second episode. Overall, though, I would give the second episode like an 8 out of 10 because, again, I thought that it was funny. The fact that they made the murderer the main character, like a detective of a show, it just, I thought it worked out really well.
Yeah, well, it got an 8.7 on IMDb, and heading into the finale, what were your thoughts just on the overall show? What did you think that they were going to try to do? Did you have any expectations?
Well, throughout the season, especially because I only knew this was a prequel series, but I didn't know that it was a prequel series to Endeavour being still the main character in the new show or the stories.
Wow.
I thought that Endeavour might be like a side character.
Like Lewis?
So I was like, what are they going to do? Obviously, these characters are having to come to their end. Reginald Wright, again, he is like someone who's like 70 or 80 years old in this show. I knew that we were probably going to get a final scene with him talking about his retirement. We obviously needed to get some on the Blenheim Vale case. I didn't think, again, that we were going to get the case by week mystery that we ended up doing, but I was like, I also want to see what's going to happen because a storyline I had not mentioned yet that's been throughout the whole season is the love interest, Joanne, is getting married to Jim Strange.
Yeah, that feels like a fairly significant one to fans.
Yeah, and Morse apparently is going to be the best man, but he still has apparently liked Joanne, and I'm not sure if they ever used to have a thing or not. It didn't really seem that way.
It's like a will they, won't they that lasted 9 seasons, and I give it credit. Like, if you bring it over to The Office, we get like 2 seasons before Jim made his move, and it's just like, they're not afraid to play it, I don't even want to call it more realistically, but more tragically in Britain when they do this type of storyline. And it's just impressive that they lasted this long. And so that's why a lot of people were hoping in that last episode something would change. Partially because in the future series, so Jim Strange, That's the person that she's set to marry, who kind of is an adversary, but he's his boss in the future.
In the episodes, it doesn't seem like Jim Strange is that bad a guy. Like, again, he even asked Morse to be his best man.
Sure. It's just that they kind of have a different viewpoint on how to tackle cases. Neither of them are evil, but later on in the next series, in Inspector Morse, Jim Strange's wife isn't necessarily they don't have any sort of connection, her and Endeavour. So if they actually do get married, Joan, and she ends up being the same character, then it's really sad.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
So going into the third episode, I saw it more like a Better Call Saul situation where you knew that there were certain relationships that had to break because they were never mentioned again.
Right.
And so not only the Joan relationship, but also the Thursday relationship. So what happens in that last episode?
One thing I should also mention is Sam, who is, I think it's his name, his first name, I keep calling him by his last name, but it's like Frank Thursday or something, right? Yeah, his son ended up coming back in the
so
first
episode. You're talking about Fred Thursday's son.
Fred Thursday, yeah. He's had some trouble. He's not really acting like himself, and that gets very much explored in this finale. So in the finale, there's a string of deaths in Oxford, and all of the deaths obituaries have some phrase in Latin on them. Mm-hmm. And even Morse says in the episode, he's like, the killer wants us to know that he's smart. Basically, he's taunting them. And as
it's funny because the episode title was originally supposed to be called Epilogue, but then they went with the Latin term Exeunt, which is Latin for they leave the stage.
Yeah, no, because Epilogue wouldn't have really made a lot of sense because a lot of big things happen this episode. For example, we get Reginald Bright speaking to not only Thursday but also Morse, and I think even Jim Strange at one point where he kind of gives his final goodbye. That happened like 30 minutes into the episode. In fact, I even have it as a highlight as one of my pros because even though I didn't see the whole series, you could tell there was a lot of weight just behind that character leaving. Mm-hmm. Not only that, we also get Arthur, who I think must have been a character that was in earlier seasons. He's shown up because there is a biker, part of a person who was part of a biker gang who was knifed in the heart and ended up dying.
Yes.
And apparently that has some association with Sam. Has kind of had some trouble this season.
Well, Fred Thursday got mixed up in a bunch of corrupt policemen throughout the series, and he's kind of been, because of his son, blackmailed.
That makes so much more sense now because Fred says in the last episode, he's like, 4 years ago, I tried to make a turn towards good, and I wasn't really sure what exactly that meant. Mm-hmm. But someone named Charlie kind of calls Fred up and is like, look, meet at this location, and we'll kind of talk to you about what's going on. And then Fred shows up, and what do we know? But this is where we get the revelation that Blenheim Vale was apparently... Blenheim Vale was done by Arthur, the character that we kind of met earlier on in the episode.
Yeah, there's an excavation that happens, and they find all the kids that you were talking about earlier, and they're all dead, obviously.
Yeah.
It
got surprisingly dark, and Morse even says to one of the people who must have something to do with the case that they're going to find this kid. They really want to find this kid named Peter Williams and figure out why Andrew Lewis, who again was the kid that was trying to look for his mom, ended up, who killed him, why that was the case, and everything going on.
Well, do I understand it correctly that Morse keeps on attending all the funerals?
Yes.
And that's how he's tracking down exactly what's going on?
That's where, that's actually for the Case by Week storyline. So he keeps on going to the funerals and sees that the flowers that are being delivered to them keep on having messages written on them in Latin. Mm-hmm. So he goes to the flower place. And
so he makes the connection to the obituary, and that's how...
And not only that, when he's speaking to the morticians, and the morticians are giving the death notice, the mortician's name is correct because they're interviewing him, but apparently the place that the mortician worked, the phone number is wrong. And then when they reverse trace the phone number, Morse decides to go to the place where the phone number is coming from, and it turns out that it's kind of an abandoned building. Only a janitor is working there being like, yeah, it turns out that no one's really been here for the longest time. So this episode already, in episode 3, I felt like this was really entertaining to watch, and it was the first Endeavour episode where I wanted to see what happened next, and it really did hold my attention because I was like, there's so many question marks as to what's going on. We have the biker gang that was murdered. We have the Blenheim Vale case kind of getting more in depth with that storyline. And also we have this weird mortician death storyline. And so those were the 3 that we dealt with this episode. So with the one case about the flowers and the mortician, how that gets resolved is the flower place calls up Morse and is like, we've gotten another one of these messages. It's written in Latin. Like, you might want to check this out because, again, it seems like these obituaries are being written before like the actual murders happen. And so it turns out that Morse goes to this place. He sees that one of the professors that they talked to about one of the murders that happened earlier is now on kind of this hit list, and he goes to the place that I went to before where trying to figure out what exactly was happening, and it turns out that the murders that have continued to happen have been because of the janitor that spoke to him before. The janitor attacks him, and they stop the janitor from killing him. One thing I will say about Britain television series is that at least when it comes to the action, especially in Endeavour, they are always incredibly short. Like, they're only like 30 seconds, like these fight scenes, where at least in America, you know, you would probably get like 3-minute like action scenes or things like that. But they stopped the janitor, and it turned out that the janitor was a like alt-right nut, because apparently he was mad at all these professors for like always like being part of these really liberal policies and just wanting to kill them.
Interesting.
So that was how the one storyline gets replaced, and then when it comes to the Blenheim Vale case, on the day of the wedding, even though Morse is the best man, he decides not to show up. I'm guessing that either Arthur called Thursday and was like, hey, I need you to show up to this abandoned orphanage because that's where they found a body in the second episode or something. But it turns out that Morse is going to be the one that shows up. Thursday just decided to attend his daughter's wedding, and Morse gives his like ring to someone else that's going to the wedding as well. And as Morse talks to Arthur, we learn that Arthur...
It's not his ring, but yeah.
Yeah, no, I'm talking about for Jim Strange, because he's the best man. But yeah, Arthur decides to just kind of spill everything to Morse when Morse is asking all these questions. It turns out that Arthur killed Andrew Lewis because he didn't want the kid to be talking too much about the mom, who he also killed. And then Peter Williams, how that factors in is that he was this kid that was kind of taken away, and Morse kept on thinking throughout the episode that he was dead, but really what ended up happening was this little baby, Arthur decided to give to another family that was like that just wanted a kid, and then Peter Williams ended up being the biker that died that had a knife in his chest. So that's the reason why Arthur initially came down from wherever he did, because he wanted to make sure that everything was still okay. But he decides he has money that I think belongs to Thursday, so he gives it to Morse. But then what do you know, it turns out that Arthur has hired some hitmen, and the hitman like kind of come out. They start beating up Morse, and then randomly the biker gang shows up because they've learned either that from Morse or they've just figured it out that Arthur was the one to kill one of their members. So Arthur's fate is kind of left unresolved. But Morse takes the money and decides to go to the wedding. And the final 30 minutes of Endeavour were actually kind of sad. That's where the tragedy that you're talking about comes into play. He shows up at the wedding. He speaks to Joanne, and he kind of professes his love for her. He's like, you know what, I loved you ever since like the first minute I saw you, all this stuff, but it's too late now. And then Joanne is like, no, it's not. And they kiss at the wedding. And I was like, what? I was like, what?
So you were tricked by that?
Yes, because then it ends up being one of those rewind moments. It's actually like still at a point in the conversation that was earlier.
A daydreaming sequence.
I think the reason why I was so tricked by it is because Endeavour hasn't done anything like that ever. I think
it was like series. A little bit of fan service, but at the same time, fan service without actually like destroying the plot of the show or destroying like the theme of the show.
Yeah, and it only lasted like 30 seconds. So Joanne and Jim Strange, they head into their car, and it turns out that Morse is pretty sad. But one thing
you
that
think?
Well,
he just lost like the love of his I guess series.
It gets even worse though, because when Morse earlier on in the episode was checking on the place with the biker who died, he found a pin, and that pin belonged to Fred. So Fred is like moving out of his place. There's even this short scene with his wife where they're kind of crying about how they're having to leave. I assume that's the house that they've been at throughout the whole entire series.
Yep.
And while Fred and Morse are having this conversation, Morse basically confronts him and is like, I found this pin at the spot with the biker gang after telling him all the stuff that happened with Arthur. What exactly went on here? And what happened was Sam was he was like buying drugs. One of the bikers, again by the name of Kenneth, he ended up getting really mad that he was dealing on his turf, or the biker's turf, and was about to stab Sam because he was like really confronting him and really angry. And then Fred shows up kind of out of nowhere and decides to knife the biker gang.
Yeah.
And so Morse is like, you know what?
I think the guy's name is Tomahawk, right?
Yeah, Tomahawk. Yeah. That was the biker's name. Again, Peter Williams or Kenneth, as I think the parents that he.
But Morse doesn't tell Fred Thursday that it was Peter Williams, because Peter Williams was a kid that they were looking for a really long time.
Yeah, I know. I'm just saying that was the same character.
Sure, but I'm trying to explain why like the rupture in their relationship was so hard that he wouldn't ever talk about Fred later on in the series. That's what they were really trying to get across. Is that without killing Fred, they were going to make it so that Morse would A, keep a secret, but also just not refer to his old colleague.
Well, also, I think that Morse and Fred, like, even Morse says when he pulls out the pins, that he would have, like, led Fred into battle. Like, their friendship has been really uniform in, like, all of the series.
Yeah.
And so it was...
But so this is a hurtful thing.
So this was very, this is very sad.
The other thing is, like, is Morse still an alcoholic at this point? Because in the first episode, if he's an alcoholic, then you'd think that would be,
I mean, he does drink beer somewhat,
okay.
But
right.
I mean, I don't think it was really that big a part of the series.
Sure.
So Sam is like, Morse is like, this biker gang, it's going to continually come after you. You have to take Sam, your wife, and yourself, and you have to leave.
Yeah.
And Morse even gives him the money that Arthur showed up with, that apparently was Thursday's. And there was a very sad scene where I think they're outside of an airport, even though I didn't see any airplanes or anything. Wherever they're going, it's the last time we're going to see Morse and Fred, because they kind of have one of those handshakes
together.
Fred calls him Endeavour, and Morse says something like, just Morse will do. And I wasn't sure if that was supposed to be like a sign of like him kind of forgiving him, or if that was a sign of him kind of still being hurt by what was happening.
I think it's more a sign of him moving on from his Endeavour, like his first name, into the next show. Because the next scene you see is supposed to be something about a gun, right?
Yeah, so Fred...
Did you think... Okay,
So Fred gives him a gun, Morse a gun, and we see him outside at church, Morse now. Mm-hmm. And I was like, he's looking at the gun, and I was like, there's no way they're going to kill him off. Like fuck off was basically my thought. I was like, writers, you're not going to trick me with this. He puts the bullet in, and I was like, you're still not going to trick... He closes the gun, and then I kept thinking to myself... Well, and I wasn't really thinking about the fact that it was a prequel, so I was like, Fred is gone. He's just lost the love of his life. Reginald Bright, a man who also he was kind of friends with, who was his boss, has left. He really doesn't have any reason to live. And then bang.
Also, I'll stop you right there. Spoiler for the Inspector Morse series, if anybody's unaware. So just pause it or skip like 30 seconds. But like they do kill off Inspector Morse in the last episode of that series. So it would have been kind of like, I don't know, in a different world, maybe like an alternative universe, they do the same thing with his younger self.
Yeah, well, it was probably a reference to that.
I think it was more him again giving up his perky personality for his old grumpy personality.
It's not like Morse this season has been this like really happy person.
Exactly, because it's been 9 seasons worth of it, and this is the season where he's finally showing that he's so close to the previous version of him, played by John Thaw, that's what they were going with. I don't know.
Yeah, well, anyways, you see these pigeons fly, and I was like, oh, is he actually dead? No, it turns out that the next scene he's
So what do you think happened?
I think that he probably just shot the sky for some reason.
People were making guesses like it was symbolic, like okay, he's killed off his Endeavour personality.
I think it's almost like that, where it's like Fight Club.
People have also mentioned several other theories, like one being Russian roulette, where he was in such a dark place at that time, he decided like, okay, I'm gonna shoot one at the ground, shoot one at my head, like that type of thing.
Okay, because I was gonna say
that's probably the most reasonable.
You hear the bang.
Yeah.
So yeah. Okay.
And or the third one is that he actually did shoot himself and then needed plastic surgery, and that's why he looks different in the later series. But I mean, that's obviously wrong because we still see him in the next scene.
Yeah, the next scene. Well, that was actually one of my questions. It only makes sense now that there's a sequel series to it, but I was wondering maybe the gun scene could have happened after this scene because, and they were just showing you another scene with Morse because he's at this choir thing that he was talking about that he needed to go to in the episode.
Yeah.
He's singing with the choir.
I'm going to talk a lot about the trivia of this episode at the end, but I'll say that for the song that they were singing, it's the same song that they were using in the first episode when he was introduced. Gabriel Fauré, the French composer who wrote Requiem in 1900. So
and he listens to Requiem earlier on in this episode as well. Like, but I also remember, that was the beginning scene of the first episode.
Everything connects.
Yeah, yep. And so he goes up to the orchestra conductor or the choir conductor, and he's like, "Is that it?" And the choir conductor is like, "Yep, that's it." And he basically drives into the sunset, and that was the end of Endeavour. I did not expect.
Now you're skipping over the part where he drives into the sunset in his black Jaguar, and he passes the red Jaguar coming in with the other version of him going the other way.
That
but
was,
you wouldn't
that
understand
was, yeah,
that.
I was like, wow, okay.
So you see the eyeballs of Endeavour.
Yes, okay, so that's more sense. I saw the eyeballs and I was like, I know that's supposed to be Endeavour. I know that's supposed to be Morse, but he looks so much older.
Yeah, Morse was the other one driving in.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Yeah, but I did not expect the third episode to be as good as it was. I was just thinking, it might have a couple good parts here and there, but really around the time, I'd say after the first 30 minutes, when you get Reginald Bright's final scene, that's when the episode really picked up, and I really, really enjoyed the third episode. And I'll give my ratings really fast for all three episodes before I talk about more. Episode 1, I don't think it passes. It was pretty boring. It was just about the violinist, and again, pretty standard episode. I give it like a 5 out of 10. Episode 2, I like the Clockwork Orange characters, and I like the fact that it was the main actor in the television series. I found it funny as well. I give it an 8 out of 10, and then episode 3, I give like a 9 out of 10. Possibly even higher, which is why I never thought I'd say this, but season 9 of Endeavour I'm going to give like an 8 out of 10 to.
It has a 9.1 on IMDb, so people agree with you. It also had very positive reviews from The Guardian, Den of Geek, Telegraph, 4 out of 5. And then, I can jump into trivia, but do you want to address anything else?
No, that's basically all I had.
All right.
I mean, I will say this, except for possibly the exception of Sam, I never felt like any of the characters were like annoying. I whenever a character showed up, even though there could be dry parts and there could be scenes where it was just a lot of talking, I never was annoyed and was like, oh, can we just get done with this scene? Which is not something you can say for a lot of different shows.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, so for trivia on the last episode, there were a lot of Easter eggs, but one of the big ones was that Andrew Lewis, the one who died, right?
Yeah.
Who was killed by Arthur, he was a relative of a police cadet whose name is Robert Lewis. They said that in the show, and that is Lewis as in the Lewis that Morse would end up being teamed up with, who got his own spin-off series.
Oh, okay.
So that was the connection there. Colin Dexter makes his last appearance in the episode, like I mentioned earlier, in a poster advertising Dexter's satchels that appears on the wall in the Burridge's men's footwear department. Do you know what I'm talking about?
I don't know.
All right. And then I already talked about Requiem. Director Kate Saxon directed the prior 2 season finales and also returned to do this one, apart from Sean Evans himself, who directed an episode this season.
Yeah, I saw a picture of him right next to the camera when I was doing research for just kind of the show itself, just to get some names and stuff. And so I was pretty sure he directed one of the episodes.
In total, he directed 4 episodes throughout the entire series, and making him the most used director, but she made the second most used director.
So he made the most episodes?
He made the most direction episodes, doing the directing of those episodes. And then as a weird tidbit, Kate Saxon is known for her work on video games. Far Cry 3, Fable 3, Witcher 3, Bond Bloodstone 3. No, it's just Bond Bloodstone. And actor Sean Evans also finished his run as Endeavour Morse at age 43. And John Thaw began his turn at Morse at age 44.
Oh, cool.
Isn't that? Yeah, it's cool. So, and then is Rocket Man in this episode?
Yeah, they do have actually some pretty famous songs for the finale, but yeah, Rocket Man is
it a version of Rocket Man that's orchestral, or is it like an actual?
I think it's the actual version.
It's just the actual version.
Yeah.
Okay. The only complaint that I feel like actually resonated was the one about Joanne and Jim. I feel like if you were watching this Will They Won't They after so long, and then you know what happens to those characters, and you know that in the next series they have no relationship, that would be so hard. Like, imagine, again, the Pam and Jim, if they had never gotten together in the office, but they always had that undercurrent, and her and Roy in, like, the next series, like, she didn't hate Jim, but like they had no connection.
Well,
It's just so weird.
I felt like it was more real in that sense, and I think that if Sean Evans really showed the power of his acting in the scene, it's the scene where you see that was just kind of a dream, because he did a really good job. He's like even somewhat crying, but he's having to hold back, and he's also speaking to Jim. It was just, yeah, I think that when it came to my favorite part of probably the whole season, it was probably that scene right there.
I think it was the favorite, not the scene, but the wedding altogether was probably the favorite of everybody's, because it was the first time they had all the cast in all 9 seasons together, because they separate usually.
Yeah, that's what the show, I mean, this whole entire season was building towards. It was the undercurrent really for this series. Again, I did not expect to enjoy it as much as I did, mostly because, again, I wasn't a big fan of the first season, but season 9 of Endeavour was pretty good, and I might even go back probably sometime way in the future, to watch the rest of the series. I don't know.
All right, we'll leave it there. Thanks for listening. We'll see you on the next episode. Hope you enjoyed this one. Bye.
Bye.